Ellipses and circles are really important graphics primitives, so processing makes it really easy to draw them. Now, just as we saw with rectangles, where there's no special way to make a square, so too in ellipses, there's no special way to make a circle. We just draw an ellipse that's as wide as it is tall, and that's a circle. So let's see how to make an ellipse. The basic step is just like drawing a rectangle. We identify a rectangle on the screen, and processing fits an ellipse into that rectangle as snugly as it can. Now, if that was all there was to it, we would be done, because I'd say just do what we did with rectangles, but draw ellipses instead. But there's one minor difference. When you define an ellipse, you identify it with the center of the ellipse, followed by the width and the height. You may recall for rectangles, we gave the rectangle command the upper left X and Y, followed by the width and the height. But for an ellipse or a circle, we give it the center. It turns out that's much more convenient for circles and ellipses, and so that's the default. So we give processing the center X and Y, width and height, and it draws an ellipse that just snugly fits into that box. So here's the command. You give the command ellipse, all lowercase, and remember there are two L's in ellipse. So you say ellipse, open paren, we're going to name our stuff, close paren, semicolon. So what goes between the parens? Well, it's just the center X and center Y, the values at the middle of the ellipse, followed by the width and the height. So let's take a look at how to actually draw a couple of ellipses. Here's our graphics window. I've drawn it on a piece of graph paper. And here is a box for an ellipse. Now the center of the box I've marked as being at 125.90. The box is 150 units wide by 60 units high. If we give processing this box, it draws this ellipse. So let's figure out the command. We give it ellipse, open paren, eventually there's a closed paren and a semicolon. And in between, we first give the X coordinate of the center and the Y coordinate of the center. Then the width and the height, and that will draw this ellipse. So great, let's look at another example. Suppose that we wanted to draw an ellipse in this box. Well, you might want to pause the video for a second and write down for yourself what the command would be. But here's the command. First, of course, as always, we realize we're going to draw an ellipse that snugly fits the box. So we type ellipse, and inside we put the X center and the Y center, the width and the height. And that will draw this ellipse. Now, I mentioned before that there's nothing special about drawing circles. We just draw an ellipse with equal width and height. So here's a box for an ellipse that will draw a circle. And because it's 60 units wide and 60 units high, the ellipse that goes inside will be as wide as it is tall, and that turns it into a circle. So the command, as before, we say ellipse. Inside we put the X value of the center, the Y value of the center, the width, and the height. So let's actually look at a demo that shows ellipses in action. Here's a sketch that lets us see what changing the values in the ellipse command does to produce different looking ellipses. So in the command at the top, you can see we have 4 numbers, and as we know, the first 2 are the X and Y of the center, and I've drawn them in sort of a dark yellow, and they're represented by that big dark yellow circle. The third number in the command is the width. That's in blue, and I've got this big blue grabber circle at the far right. When I grab that, I can change the width. The final value in the ellipse command is the height. That's in this kind of aqua color, and you can see I have a big aqua grabber at the bottom of the ellipse. Well, I'm going to hide all these grabbers so that we can just see the ellipse that's drawn by this command. But let's bring them back and now use them to manipulate the ellipse. So I'm going to click in the middle of the yellow thing and drag around, and you can see that the X and Y values of the center of the ellipse are being updated, but the ellipse itself isn't changing shape. And that's because the width and height aren't changing. I can actually drag this thing off screen. Processing doesn't care. I can drag it completely off screen. and processing doesn't care. It just draws as much of it as it can wherever you happen to specify it's located. Now, if I want to change the width, I'll grab this width grabber, and you can see the width value goes down, 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 down as I move it closer and closer to the center. And we get a narrower and narrower ellipse. Tell you what, let's turn those things off, and you can see in light gray, I'm drawing the box that defines the ellipse, and then in brown we have the ellipse itself. So let's open this thing back up, and I'll do the same thing with the height controller. You can see the light gray box behind is getting smaller. And now I'll take away the grabbers, and you can see I can make an ellipse that looks like that. So let's open this thing up. Let's take a look at one other thing. What happens if I drag the width all the way down to 0 and then pass through 0? What happens when the width becomes negative? Well, it actually doesn't really make much of a difference whether the width is negative or positive, because the ellipse is symmetrical around the center. So tell you what, let's make it 222, because that's an interesting number. So there we are. So take a look at that thing. That's the ellipse when the width is minus 222. Whoop. And now I'm going to grab this thing and make it positive 222. And it's pretty much the same shape. In fact, it's exactly the same shape. So whether the width and the height are positive or negative makes no difference. It's just the size of that number. So let's make a circle. So I'll tell you what, let's make a circle that's 400 pixels high and 400 pixels wide. And I'll just drag this thing in until it's 400. And that makes a circle. And if I hide all the other stuff, there it is. And if I moved this slider down, I'll tell you what, let's move it to the right. And if I move this slider so that the width is minus 400, and I hide everything, you'll see it's the very same circle. Now I've moved it, but it's still a circle. So the width and the height don't care about positive or negative. All that matters is the x and y values of the center, the width, and the height. And with these four numbers, you can draw an incredible variety of ellipses of all kinds of shapes.